Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the Multiplicity podcast, episode 2. And especially thank you to Erik for joining. Erik is a professor of economics at Stanford. And if you don't mind me telling you today for the first time, Erik, you are my favorite economist. And
Well,
I'm
that's a very
really,
low bar, but I'm glad I cleared it.
I'll be sure not to let any of your economist friends know that
Yeah,
you said
well,
that.
yeah. Okay, well, no, that's very nice of you to say. We've had some great conversations in the past, and so it's always fun to talk to you again.
I'm so excited that I get to share this experience. I've had really and been witness to really amazing conversations with you and other people, and I'm really excited to share what that's like. And I'm sure your students get to experience that all the time at Stanford, but not everybody, gets to listen to Erik talk every day. And I'm just going to add one more day to that queue for everybody, I
Well,
hope.
I love being a professor. It's so fun talking to the crazy smart people I get to interact with at Stanford, MIT, and elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. So that's we're trying to export more of that. So tell me, Erik. You wrote this paper recently about it was called Canary in the Coal Mine: 6 facts about the impact of artificial intelligence on the economy. If I'm
Pretty
approximately
close, yeah, on the
pretty
labor
close.
market, yeah. Um, Absolutely. So that was with Bharat Chandar and Ruyu Chen, two amazing, speaking of which, two super smart people that I get to work with at Stanford. Ruyu's a research scientist and Bharat is a postdoc. And yeah, this was a paper. Just we were curious. We'd heard so much, like everybody has, about how AI was changing the labor market. There's so many headlines about job loss, or other people saying, no, 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 that's all wrong. We're actually hiring more people. Lots of anecdotes going in every direction. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs destroyed and created every month. So it's not hard to find examples of either one if you want to, and get fooled by that. So we wanted to really dive in deeper. And when we first looked at it, can I give you sort of the long version, or do you want me to cut? Yeah,
Please. Oh, we
I'll
got
give you
lots of time, and I
I'll
love
give
it.
you a little bit of the backstory because I think it's kind of interesting.
Love
So
the long version.
when we first dove into it, actually we didn't see much. I mean, if you look at the top line, either for like the government data, the current population survey, or even the ADP data that we used, there's noise up and down, but it wasn't like obvious that there was like a big change in the labor market. But then we started diving into it a little bit more closely. And when you slice it by different subgroups, different groups are having very different effects. Some have rising employment, but some have like very sharply falling employment. And it's a pattern that kind of is striking, that in particular, occupations that are highly exposed to AI are finding that young workers, that is age 22 to 26, have much less employment now than they did before the introduction of ChatGPT and other tools. About 20% fewer for coders, 15% less for call center operators. Um, Whereas jobs that are not exposed to AI, like home healthcare workers, actually have rising employment for those groups. Meanwhile, more senior workers, mid-career workers, things are kind of steady as she goes, not that much of a change, a little bit up and down here. And we'll talk later about some of the different patterns, I think, about what's happening for people who use the technology to augment their jobs versus automate them. But first, those sort of main results there. Um, it, one of the things that we've been doing for a while is understanding which tasks are most likely to be affected by AI, especially Gen AI. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a taxonomy of jobs and tasks, like 950 jobs in the economy, like economist, AI researcher, nurse, bus driver, radiologist. And for each of them, they describe what are the main tasks that person does. So for radiologists, they list 27 distinct tasks, like reading medical images or, consulting with other doctors or talking to patients. And for each of those tasks, in turn,
And
we
when you
can,
say they listed the tasks, who were the people or institutions making the task list?
so ONET is this large data set anybody can tap into that the Bureau of Labor Statistics put together.
Got it.
And
So it's
they
the
have,
bureau rather than the staff and the jobs who are making the list, or
right,
presumably
the
some kind of
Bureau
collaboration.
interviews people. And so they'll go and talk to a bunch of radiologists and they'll list them, but it's sort of like their expert judgment. But it's based on that. And it's a great data set that's used a lot. That said, we can do better, and we will do better. I can describe some of the ways we do better, but that's a good starting point. It's widely used. It's kind of accepted. And so then you can, have, something on the order of 18,000 distinct tasks that across these 900 occupations that you could evaluate. And that's what we did. First, Tom Mitchell, Daniel Rock, and I did that. We scored everyone as to whether or not machine learning could help with it in a paper that we published in Science. Later, Tina Alandu and Daniel Rock and Pamela Mishkin and Sam Manning looked at what could be done with generative AI. Um,
Wow. Can I,
so
by the way, if you,
yeah,
I'm going to ask so many questions. That's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
why I'm excited to do this. So tell me about the scoring. Like, how was that? Was some set of rankers, or you guys did it, or AI did it, or how did that work?
both. So we started off with humans, which is a little tedious. We hired, we came up with a rubric of like, here's some things AI can do well and not so well in principle. And here's characteristics of a task they can do well. And then we gave that list to mechanical Turkers and survey people. And then we had 10 humans rank every task based on our criteria. That's how we did it at first. That was before Gen AI. We did that paper in 2017. Now it's actually much better to have AI do the ranking, and you calibrate it every once in a while. You check it against humans and make sure that it's sort of realistic. But this paper that Ilandu et al., Daniel Rock and others did, they did it both ways and showed that they gave you basically the same answers. Nowadays, we mostly just have the LLMs rank them because,
Wow.
they can be very, very thorough. Um, but there is some art as well as some science in defining exactly how they rank them. And depending on how you do it, you may get slightly different rankings, but a lot of them are pretty obvious. Like, writing a memo, summarizing a document, obviously an LLM can do a good job with that. Lifting a box, driving a
Right.
tractor trailer,
That's the beauty of
LLMs aren't so good at that.
rankings. The
What's
beauty of
that?
rankings is like the beauty of rankings is that it's you don't quite have to say how much better is an LLM at writing a memo at lifting a box, or
Yeah,
whatever. But
exactly.
it's clearly better at writing than at lifting
Clearly.
boxes
And then
today.
there's some in the middle, some gray areas. So you can put them, on whatever kind of scale you want. So we have all of those. And then um, once we did that, you can roll them back up to occupations. And there's no occupation we found where LLMs just run the table and can do all of the tasks. And there's no occupation on the other end where LLMs couldn't do anything. So most occupations are kind of a mix. But some are much more susceptible to having LLMs help them.
I mean, I
And
guess that corresponds to the fact that they're language devices and somewhat image processing devices as well, but they're sort of
exactly.
processing, talking about
So
generating
white
talking
collar,
words and image.
lawyers, coding is near the top of the list. It turns out, well, we all know now that's something that they can do help a lot with. Call center operators is also at the top of the list. Um, so, just for convenience, we divided the sample into 5 quintiles. And the top quintile, the one that was most exposed to LLMs, had on average, those jobs had about a 15% decline in employment since late 2022, early
And
2023.
exposed means like a larger number of the tasks are doable by the LM, or like the average score of the tasks involved in the job is high. What does exposed roughly mean there?
Basically, that more of the tasks could be done, more of the important tasks could be done. It's not super sensitive. You can, slice and dice it
Sure.
slightly different ways. You
Sure.
get a very similar ranking.
Yes.
Um, so, but it's kind of the ones
All
that
these
you would,
sort of like nitpicky questions are usually not that I usually understand that the sensitivity analysis is going to come out in favor of this just being a fine way to
no,
measure,
I'm
but it's
glad you
more
asked
like a
because sometimes it
grounding.
matters, and definitely, and we'll talk later about actually the type of exposure turns out to matter a lot, like augmenting versus automation. I didn't necessarily know that would matter, but it did. But these 20% most exposed occupations had about a 15% decline, and I don't have a whiteboard or a graph right here, but it was like you could look at all different age groups, just had rising employment up until around 2022 or late 2022, early 2023. And then they started diverging and diverged more and more, where the young workers started having falling employment, older workers continued to rise. Um, So that's what happened in the most exposed occupations. In the less exposed occupations, you got a little bit of that. And in the least exposed, the home health aides, etc., then the pattern was reversed. Then it was actually the younger workers actually had faster growing employment than the average. Um,
Wow. Can you
yeah,
that one I can sort of speculate as to why the old young divide makes sense in the highly exposed case, but I'm struggling to come up with an intuition for why it might reverse. Do you have any sort of guesses as to why that's happening?
yeah. So I don't know for sure. I don't want to
Of
overclaim
course.
here. This is not like a careful causal estimate. This is just describing 6 facts of what is happening in the world. Um, in terms of, let me start with your first question or your first comment, like why the younger workers are more affected. I think it's just that the LLMs are better at sort of like the simple coding tasks and the more sophisticated tasks. The more senior people probably have more tacit knowledge. They know some of the tips and tricks that have never been written down, whereas the younger workers are more sort of like doing stuff by the book, which is what the LLMs can also do. So there's more of a substitute for the beginning coders, the beginning customer service people, etc. Now at the other end, I think it may just be a little bit early bit of shifting. I mean, it wasn't nearly as a big effect on the other end, by the way, but there's a little bit of an effect there that I think that, um, you know, there's just not as much opportunity in call centers and other places, and there's more opportunity in the other one. So the workers are kind of shifting from one place to the other. I mean, they're still looking for jobs, and they end up finding that okay, I'm gonna, there's interest in this other category, so we're going to go there. And meanwhile, less interest and less demand in the most exposed occupations. That
That's
said, there was
interesting.
still a net decline in young people's employment. Um, and if you look at the age groups, these two effects net out that there's somewhat less employment overall, much less in the exposed ones, slightly more in the unexposed ones, and the sum is a negative number.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think I have a different intuition for why the coding, for example, in
Yeah,
particular, is so senior heavy and who's benefiting. I think it has to do with, first of all, uh, coding is used to make AI. So you want AI to be good at helping you build AI, and all the AI companies can dog food their product that way.
right,
And one of the things that you most want as a senior engineer is junior engineers who will do what you ask.
right,
Not just who are good at their job, but who will do the thing that you ask and pursue the vision that you have in mind for the company or that the leadership has in mind. And AI is incredibly compliant
right.
compared to humans. I mean, it still misbehaves, but compared to humans, I mean, it's just the level of patience it has for changing what it's doing, changing its approach. You can literally delete and rewind its memory in a way that
Right.
you can never do to a human. So so there's this sort of compliance nature to the AI that isn't necessarily an intelligence or a capability as much as it is a capacity or property, this compliance
Yeah,
property.
that's a good
And
point.
I
I think that's part of it. I think these are related, that the junior people are sort of more following instructions, and the AI is very good at that. And so that's more of a fit. And, we've both talked to people on, coding teams, and there's often a senior person who sets the overall vision. This is what needs to be done, and then delegates different parts to junior people, and increasingly delegating different parts to AI agents, or at least junior people working with AI agents that maybe, I mean, the people are telling me, something that might have taken 2 or 3 months now takes 2 or 3 weeks or even 2 or 3 days to accomplish. And I've done a little bit of that myself, we'll, play with Lovable or whatever, and I can see how much faster it is. And so you still need to do the big picture guiding things, but a lot of the subtasks can now be done increasingly with the help of AI.
Yeah, so this intuition for me helps me understand the high exposure cases where the junior staff are not needed to take on all the delegation. Um, but I'm still struggling and again, I realize it would just be speculation, but I'm struggling to even speculate as to why the junior staff and the lower exposure uh,
I think it's a
occupations.
it's a general equilibrium thing that's going on here, that
Hmm,
there's a bunch of people going into the workforce, young people, they can't find jobs in the more exposed ones, and so
got it.
they don't have to, but some of them are finding jobs elsewhere, maybe not their first choice job, but there's both supply and demand at work. And even though on average fewer young people are working, some of them are just deciding, you know what, I'm just going to get a job as a home health aide because
That's
I
great.
need to pay the rent.
And I
um,
mean, to me, that feels very optimistic because it means we're covering off, things that need to be done to take care of people, especially home health aides. I mean, that's
yeah,
just such a like if the
totally.
world is freeing up the capacity of smart, talented people to take better care of each other, that feels incredibly optimistic to
Well,
me.
I don't know if I'd say incredibly optimistic, but yeah, I do think that there is sort of a reallocation, and over time, the economy will adjust, and maybe even new jobs will be created, new categories. But yeah, right, there'll be some reallocation. There's not a shortage of work that needs to be done. It's another way of saying it. And so, yeah, if we could have some people help with home health aid, cleaning the environment, doing all sorts of other things that right now aren't being done, we're now freeing up some labor to do that. So, that's part of what seems to be happening. Um, since we wrote the paper, we had data up through July. The nice thing about this ADP data, I should give credit to them. It's the world's largest payroll processor. Absolutely amazing data. And that enabled us to slice it this very fine, by the way. Let me just say a word about the data. Working with ADP, we're able to do these analyses. And when we did the exact identical analyses on the government current population survey or other data sets, you couldn't see these effects. Why? Just because it was like 2 orders of magnitude less data. So you couldn't slice it by age, occupation the way we did here. So you just got kind of noise. Like there might be like 70 people in the current population survey that are age 20 to 26 who are coders. And it's just too small a sample. It's not. And then the next month, it would be a different 70 people. So you're kind of getting this mix of people. Whereas
Wow.
with the ADP, you have much more detail, and so we could really see it nicely. The other thing though is we get new data every month. It's very current. Um, it's now December as we're recording this. I don't know when you're going to broadcast it, but we already got data from November, and so we've updated it. And one of the things that's striking but also a little disturbing is since we published in July, we've continued to track the data, and those lines are just continuing to diverge. There's no evidence that they're snapping back. So this is not like a one-off thing. This seems to be something that is, if anything, growing. Um, so yeah, who knows what it's going to be like, 6 months or a year from now, but that's the direction that it's going, and that makes me think that there's something really important going on here.
What do you think about humanoid robots? Let's say let's take for granted that sometime over the next 5 years, could be next year, it could be 2030, but let's say it's not going to be very far away that we have functional humanoid robots that can talk to you and go around your house and follow your instructions, do
Yeah,
chores that you want, or a factory or something that normally requires humans, and you don't want to have to build a
right.
specialized separate robot for every occupation. So you just have these humanoids, and they can do a bunch of stuff. What do you think? How's the J curve, of
Yeah.
adaptation going to
Well,
go there?
I'm not quite as optimistic as you are on the technology, but maybe you're closer to it. I think, I don't think it's going to be next year. But I may be wrong. 5 years, yeah, that's starts getting plausible. I mean,
And I
I,
don't
I
mean
think it
the
depends on whether
rollout
you're
would be
talking
complete.
about prototypes and, examples versus widely used.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean I mean sort of the way Google or OpenAI had a chat-like AI system internally that was working
yeah,
well but hadn't been rolled out. I mean something like that. Like it's
yeah,
the
something
robots
like that.
there.
Well, the difference is, ChatGPT, you can go from 0 to 100 million users in 60 days because you just download it. You can't just download a humanoid robot. Not yet. Maybe 3D printers will come, but so I think it'll take longer for them to start like really affecting the labor market as much. That said, it will, things like the home health aides that we were talking about earlier, those jobs, a lot of jobs that involve physical work are going to start being affected as well. So it'll be much more widespread. My sense is that because it involves, physical implementation is going to take longer. Look at self-driving cars. I mean, I had the
Yes.
fun of riding in a Google self-driving car in 2012. from Mountain View up to San Francisco, just short of San Francisco on Route 101. We turned around. We came to a dead stop at one point in 101 because there's a lot of traffic, just like there is now. Um, and, I was like, hey, we're practically there, little details to be worked out. That was 2012. Now it's 2025. And only just, a month or two ago did Google officially open up 101 to me to ride in their Waymo cars. So what's that, 13 years, it takes a while for it to roll out. I confess I was over optimistic about how quickly self-driving cars would be widely used. And I think humanoid robots are probably a little bit more on that kind of a curve. If one of these things like falls over on a 3-year-old in a house, like that could really hurt somebody. If they're on 2 feet and there's just ways that
Yeah.
you want to have a lot of
Yeah,
safety
I could see
considerations.
the industrial applications coming before the domestic in
Yes.
terms of popularity, but that
We're doing this
flexibility.
from my home here, but if we, I don't know if you've been to my office, I can't remember, but I have a Baxter robot in my office, which is designed to work in industrial operations next to humans and not hurt them. So, yeah, but they're meant to be adults. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to put a toddler next to one, but
Right.
you can like, make them relatively safe in more controlled environments. And yeah, you're right. I think that will happen first. And there's a lot of jobs in those packing boxes and so forth that need to be done. So those jobs will be affected first and then, more widespread. But I'm thinking, decade or more before they're widely used. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. This is all on the record. You can go back and quote me. I do. I see the cognitive stuff happening a lot faster, and that actually is pretty interesting, that lag between the cognitive and the physical, because through most of history, the physical work has been more subject to automation. And that's been good for those of us who make our jobs, being professors. We can easily be replaced by machines, but now that may flip around, and arguably doctors are more at risk than nurses or orderlies for having big parts of their jobs disappear. Maybe other parts of their jobs augmented though, and that's the other optimistic side.
I have a long-standing bet with somebody that a robot will be able to load a dishwasher uh, by the end of 2025. And so
Okay,
I,
you got
I,
another few days.
there's a well, they're doing it now, and the claim was that it would happen in a prototype, and there are loads of
Okay.
prototypes doing it now.
Okay, fair. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, I like,
so
yeah, whatever. Physical intelligence and some of those companies, I've seen them do something pretty close to that. Yeah, I guess it's kind of sharp, like not a sharp line what it exactly means to load it. But like, would they?
right, so we have an arbitrator who's going to decide,
Uh-huh.
like how good of a job did the AI do loading the
Right.
dishwasher, or how
They
many
have to
different
like
kinds
take
of
it off of your dining room table and then bring it over to the dishwasher, or just
Uh,
stand
yeah,
next to
that
the
wasn't
dishwasher.
that wasn't the term. So the arbitrator is going to have to pin down all that. We didn't spend
Okay.
that long pinning
Yeah.
down the
No, I know
terms.
you exactly. You have like I mean, like, in my kitchen, like I could see it. Well, first off, it depends how mobile it has to be, but yeah. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it also depends on how chaotic, like what kind of randomness you have in the kinds of things you put in your
yeah. So
dishwasher.
all these nuances are obviously really important to how society adapts, and people depend on information from people like you to know how they should adapt and how they can
Yeah.
adapt. What career should I try next? What should I learn?
Mhm.
So, the fact that you guys managed to form that partnership with ADP and get all that data, and start answering these questions in a publicly digestible format is really, it's really wonderful. And I almost want to ask, like, how do we get more of that from the world? How do more people make those deals and get that type of data for public service, like what you've done?
Well, that is, I think, the biggest need right now is we are kind of flying blind into all this change. You and I, don't know for sure when robots and other things are going to be coming, and there's just a lot of chaos and anecdotes out there, and we need systematic data. The government isn't really collecting it. First off, they weren't that well positioned to collect it in the first place, but now there have been massive cutbacks in the budgets, which is exactly the wrong time to be doing it. I think we should be investing more in visibility. And, they didn't even deliver the jobs report last month. So it's just not the government isn't providing the data that's needed. So at the Digital Economy Lab at Stanford that I run, we're working to create an AI economic dashboard. The ADP data will be a centerpiece of it. They have partners, and we already do something called the National Employment Report that comes out every month that just kind of gives a top line number of what's happening in the economy. In November, there was a 30,000 job loss. So overall, so it bounces up and down. But we want to start providing much more fine-grained data like we did in the Canaries paper. And then we're in discussions with a number of other data providers that will provide updates on job postings, on hiring, on resumes, et cetera. And then we'll have kind of a more comprehensive dashboard. Because I think, yeah, whether you're a policymaker, a CEO, a technologist, you want to know what's happening. And like for me, at least it was a
Or
surprise.
if you're just a recent graduate from college and deciding what you should try to do for work.
Totally, exactly. I think it's, we can all make predictions about the future, but at a minimum, let's see what's happening right now. And most of the data is so old and so backward looking that if we can get something close to contemporaneous, then that would be a big improvement. So we're working on that, and we will make that much more available. And talking to the big frontier labs and trying to get them to be more forthcoming. Anthropic's been great with their own uh, prompt
Yeah, they
data.
have their
And
economic index and
yeah,
stuff that
exactly. They
they.
call it an economic index too. But it really, and by the way, that's a good segue. I should mention, we use that data in the Canaries paper as well, and it was really insightful. Um, One of the ways they classify it is, are people prompting the system to automate a task or to augment, like show them how to do the task better, maybe how to learn how to do a task? And if you divide it those ways, what we found was the occupations where it was mainly being used to automate had falling employment, but those where it was being used to augment actually had growing employment. So they had higher productivity and higher employment. So it's potentially kind of a win-win. It gets to your earlier point, like, where people, what's the optimistic story? I think one of the optimistic stories is people using AI to learn to do new things and to augment it and creating value without just losing their jobs.
Yeah, that's the way I'm hoping we can make the future go collectively as people is just, constantly finding ways to adapt to the new forms of value that we're creating. We each have niches to create value for each other, and then we
Yeah.
discover ways of automating parts of that value where teaching is such a value. And then now if we can use it to, teach us something to adapt, right? If AI can help us continue to adapt to maintaining a niche for ourselves, then that's possibly a sustainable coexistence. It doesn't mean that we're smarter than the AI, but I have, I have a whole digression I'd love to get into about like, is
Yeah, well, I
humanity.
mean, I'm really supportive of that. I don't know about forever, but sustainable in the sense that forever. But for a long time, it could be that we are learning new things, and LLMs are great tutors. There's this research by Bloom who found that if you have a one-on-one tutor, you can learn about 2 sigma faster than being taught in a classroom with 25 people. So you're kind of at that tail of rapid learning on average. Um, but of course, most people can't afford to have a private tutor until now. Now you can have an LLM. uh, Actually, I'll tell you a funny little anecdote about that. I had a friend visit, Bengt Holmstrom. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, professor at MIT. So he came to visit me at Stanford, and we were walking around, and he told me that every morning before he even gets out of bed, he sits down and has like a long conversation with ChatGPT, and it like tutors him on how quantum computing could change the financial markets or whatever. All these, really obscure, difficult topics. And I kind of thought he was joking, but then he showed me these like long transcripts of all these conversations he was having. And it was like such fun just reading the transcripts. I was like, these are really cool conversations. But it highlights how, like, even if a Nobel Prize winner can, or if even a Nobel Prize winner can learn from these systems, like all of us can learn. And there's just a lot that we could be better at.
I mean, one of the hard things about learning I've found is that uh, they're so well trained to appear smart
Well,
that you get this, you're learning a new field that's not your own, and they seem very well written and well spoken had they spoken. But they're not really, they're only like 80% on saying true things, and then there's this 20% of other random false stuff, and which is amazing. I mean, I don't want to denigrate this
yeah,
incredible accomplishment that a machine can say, some large fraction of true things at me with
right.
random pepperings of like hallucinations in there. Um,
Yeah, no,
but
no,
also,
absolutely. I agree. And when you work with it for a while, you get to learn that, especially when you do your own field and you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not correct. One of the more
yeah.
amusing, I sometimes do it when I'm driving in the car instead of talk radio or
It's the
music or
same as
whatever.
with journalism, actually,
Yeah,
right? People trust journalism outside their field and don't
yeah.
trust it in there. And like, why,
No,
why would the other fields be any different?
same with all humans, basically. And when I talk to one of my grad students, if they're 80%, correct, which is great. I think it's great. Or when I talk to one of my colleagues, which is fine. I learn stuff from them, but you always got to have to, learn a little bit of to have your guard up. And that's okay as long as you realize it. I think too many people, most of us have been
Especially
trained.
since you can use them to fact check each other, which helps a tremendous amount
That
because the,
helps a
the
lot.
errors are somewhat correlated when human knowledge is correlatedly
Yeah.
wrong, but otherwise it's pretty good to just fact check them on each
And,
other.
and you can also force them to provide the reference. When I was driving my car, I asked for a particular paper on a topic, blah, blah, blah. And there's something I really was very interested in. And it gave me this citation by Brynjolfsson and some other people. I was like, I'm pretty sure I never wrote that paper. Like, are you sure? And it's been blah, blah. And then it kind of like backtracked. It was like, oh, I was just giving an example of the kind of paper that he might have written, that you might have written. And I was like, yeah, but I didn't actually write that paper. Like, and it's sort of like, it tried to cover its tracks a little bit.
It's like your really smart friend who has good conversations at cocktail parties.
Yeah.
Like
And
they're
every
like,
once in a while they get caught bullshitting.
yeah, like everybody's listening and there's something really interesting about what they're saying, and they're right about a lot of stuff. But Santa, and I think you can put enough of those friends together to get something,
Yeah.
you can.
You still learn if you know how. I think that most of us have hung around with the previous generation of computers, a calculator or a Python program or a database lookup, and you kind of expect it to be correct. Like, it would be very weird. Although I guess it sometimes happens that a calculator gives you the wrong answer, and so we port that over and assume that LLMs are going to be like that, and they're not. They're much more creative, which is a good thing, but sometimes in a bad way. Once you get used to it, I find that, I learn how to handle that. And I ask for the reference and I ask for the pointer and I check it. But you do have to be a little bit careful like you would with another human.
Yeah, yeah, yep. So
But it's
that's
net, I think that's the big opportunity, is to learn new things and to, be able to do things we never could have before, not just automate what we're already doing. And,
right.
and, I use it. I use it as a brainstorming tool. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I think I heard you say on another interview once that, we should want AI to help us do things that we couldn't do at all, especially if things like multiplying 30-digit numbers, almost no humans could ever do that. So machines do it and we're happy. And then, there, there,
Bingo.
there are things like that that humans could never do, which hopefully,
Yeah. I mean, this gets into one of my pet peeves, which is, the Turing test, which when I was a kid thought was the coolest idea, that can we make a machine that like mimics a human so you can't tell which is which? Um, but from an economist perspective, it's actually the worst thing you could do,
yeah,
is
I
to
saw
make a machine
something
that
it
overlaps
would,
a lot with
was it
us.
called you called it the Turing Trap? Is that something? Am I
Yes.
remembering that from you? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The
I
Turing
love
trap.
that. The Turing Trap. What an amazing term, because it's a trap for businesses. It's a trap for the economy.
Exactly.
It's not actually the most helpful thing we can be doing for our.
Right. It's a lazy, easy way of using the machines, or trying to like direct technology to make them the same as us, or for CFOs, CEOs to say, hey, let's take a task we're already doing and have a machine do it. Far more valuable is what you were saying earlier, is allowing us to do new things that we've never done before. That's where most progress comes from, is the new stuff, not doing the same stuff cheaper.
Yeah,
And
like the protein folding stuff. Like people just weren't
yeah, protein
solving protein
folding.
folding, and now we are.
And, hopefully, yeah, exactly. All sorts of healthcare benefits will come from that, new discoveries. I mean, a little uh, 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 thought experiment that I wrote about in the Turing Trap was, imagine if the ancient Greeks had successfully made robots that imitated all the things that they were doing at the time, and were perfect at just taking all their jobs, so that they didn't have to work anymore. Infinite productivity, zero labor required. sounds pretty good. But suppose they literally just did the things they were doing, made a bunch of clay pots, tunics, fixed their chariots. If you were sick, they would, burn some incense for you. uh, it's nice they don't have to work anymore, but we can quickly see that their living standards would be a fraction of what ours are today, because most of the progress is not from doing the same things more cheaply; it's from new things.
Yeah. So I want to share a framework with you and then ask a question in that framework. Because people talk about the capabilities of an AI system, but the concept of a capability involves some kind of counterfactual. Like, if it tried, it could do blah, or if we asked it to, it could do blah. There's some sort of input parameter, which is whatever task it could potentially be asked to do, and then there's an output, which is a success on that task.
Right.
But if no one ever asks the AI to do the task, or it never decides on its own to do the task ever, then it won't do the task. So AIs could have tendencies to do or not do things that are separate from their capacity to do them if asked or if they wanted. And so
Okay.
there's some kind of, I don't know what the right word would be for, if they were asked or if they wanted to. But when I think about humans gauging each other's intelligence, it looks more like if asked or if you wanted. It's like that person, you know, if they wanted to, could run a farm. That
Hmm.
person, if they were asked, could, prepare these tax filings. And there's some counterfactual input and then a yeah, they could do it conclusion. And when I think about that sort of capability, that notion of capability relative to a counterfactual decision or request, um, it does seem to me like we will probably reach a point where, well, I guess I should say humanity could choose to build machines that can do everything humans can do for each other. Like everything that I
Well,
could possibly ask you to do for me,
right.
uh, I could ask a machine to do for me and the machine would do it. Now, that doesn't mean it can do everything for me that I want to do for myself. Like if I want to experience singing a song, I might need to do that.
Uh-huh.
Or if I want to experience dancing, I might need to do the dance myself. But in terms of something I could ask someone else to do for me, uh, there's this question of, will we eventually make machines that can do everything for us that we currently can do for each other?
Yeah. Well, I think the timelines make a big difference. So I think eventually, yes, and there will come a time where we can do that. I think there's probably a pretty big period before that, you know, decades, where we still will have areas of comparative advantage. And so I think it's worth distinguishing those. And I don't know how long that is. Maybe it's not decades. I can see you rolling your eyes there a little bit, but but I'm not sure how long it is.
I
It's a
was
while.
thinking,
It's
those are my thinking eyes. I'm like,
Yeah, no, that's good. No, I don't know what the right timeline is, but I want to be sort of modest in both directions. What I would say is the flip side of that, it's not ambitious enough to have AI just do what we can do. Like, we should have it allow us to do new things. The other side of it
well, I
is
guess I just mean everything that we can do, accounting for the things we can get
no, no,
AI
no,
to
no,
help us
no,
do
I
for
get
each
that.
other.
So part of it is that it should help us do new things. We were just talking about that. You're also saying having it do everything that we can already do, and that actually
I'm
is
not really
harder.
saying, I'm not talking about either of those things, actually. I guess I
Oh,
failed. Yeah, I was trying to give enough preamble to ask the question correctly, but I think I failed. What I mean is a situation where, uh, you know, so let's say we don't lose control of AI, there's no
yeah,
catastrophe, there's no extinction. It's doing all kinds of new things, but because AI can do new things that
right,
humans could never do, I can have a team of 5 AIs helping me do a thing that no human could ever do before
right,
because the
right,
AIs are helping me.
exactly.
And then the AIs also can't do it on their own because of whatever reason I have some comparative
Yeah, yeah,
advantage, right?
exactly. I think there's going to be
Now I'm
things they
saying,
can't do on their own. Yeah.
let's go past that. Let's go
Okay.
past that to the point where anything that you would ask me to run a team of AIs to do, you would instead ask an AI to run a team of
Yeah.
AIs to do. And
Right.
there's just like
And
nothing you
what I'm
want to ask.
saying is that that will come eventually, but there's this important period before then where it's actually very it's much easier to have a human do those things than to have a machine do them. And I
Yes.
think that there's a little too much attention in trying to get AI to do the things that are easy for humans but hard for machines. You know about Moravec's paradox, that whether it's buttoning my shirt or walking up the stairs or um uh all sorts of tasks that you and I can do very intuitively, they're actually really hard to get machines to do them, and there's a ton of effort going into that. And my recommendation in the Turing Trap paper is
Right.
that we lean into the things that they're good at and we're bad at and extend our capabilities. And we don't spend quite as much time on the things that we're good at and they're bad at, because those are just, we already have a way of getting those done. And it's actually, and this is the point you made earlier, I just want to underscore it, that having humans and machines have different capabilities is super valuable. So, it's part of, I think it's part of your point is that eventually we'll get to the point where they can do everything. But I think there's
All
this
right, and I
really,
guess do everything that we can do for each other at that time.
at that time,
So so
a-
there's so
including
there's
new
like
thing,
right.
and that's all good. We should talk about that in a minute. But I just want to say that for 2025, and I think for the next, number of years, I would lean into this world where we each have our comparative advantage
Hmm.
and encourage technologists, uh, CEOs, policymakers, all to focus on the world where we're having AI push the frontiers of things they can do well and we can't, and us do the other part. And then the partnership of humans and machines, the centaurs, actually are much more powerful. That has two big benefits. One, I think it leads to more possible types of work getting done where the possibility is greater. The other benefit, which is not trivial, is that it makes humans valuable. It continues to have us be part of it. And so that means we're going to have more widely shared prosperity instead of having, some uh,
Hmm.
company or government, do everything and then like hand us the wealth that gets created, which I think is kind of a potentially dysfunctional world.
This really resonates with how I want the world to be, the way
Yeah.
you're describing it, and and it's definitely where I want. It's where I feel myself leaning. It's where I want people to lean. But I don't want to just like change tack entirely and ask a question. Do you think humanity is more like a species or more like an organism? And I want to come back to what we were just talking about, but
Well, I'm not sure
this
where you're
question.
going for with, but I mean, my first answer would be like more like a species. But I mean, yeah, I mean, but I'd be happy to dive in deeper because I'm sure I'm not sure what you're getting at, but I'm open to it.
Yeah, like I guess the reason it's important to me is that, we talk about leaning into, it's like a decision. Leaning is a decision. And I want humans to make certain choices to educate themselves and adapt
Right.
themselves and their friends and their family to this, new type of value that we're creating for each other and benefiting from it, owning it, etc. So I want humans to make these choices, but I also want humanity to make certain choices. Like, if you and I get into a fight with each other, was that my decision or your decision? Or was it just a bad equilibrium that kind of emerged out of the two of us? The same can
Right.
happen, in the economy or in geopolitics,
Yes.
between companies and so on. And I'm like, you know, what are these? What are these quote unquote decisions that get made at the scale above an individual human?
Right.
That you know
Yeah.
you could, yeah.
Well, and I think those kinds of questions are 1,000 times more salient, infinitely more salient now than they were, a decade or a century ago. Like it used to be like no matter what, Napoleon or anybody else wanted to do or the average person, there's just not that much they could do to actually change humanity. Maybe if they worked really hard, they could kill a few thousand people or help a few thousand or a few million people. But now I think the stakes are so much higher, where we could have like totally different futures depending on choices we make now.
And
So we have to
and
step
and the
back
we
and make
there
those
is really interesting to me. And I don't just mean like, is it the elites or is it the general public? I just mean like, is it is it people or is it some kind of egregoric hive mind things that are deciding stuff, like some niche form that really wants lots of compute now and wants to serve lots of language models to people to tutor them and whatever, and then that sort of egregore to hive mind thing is doing its thing now. Like, did a person, did like Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis and Elon Musk and Darrow Amodei decide that, or was
uh,
that? you
I
know?
think lots of individuals can shape the future. Um, I, I don't think that there's just like forces of history that lead to one inevitable outcome, nor would I go
Right.
all the way the other way where there's like one person or some, small group of people that can decide. Um, I've just, having observed the world, I, I, I've come to the conclusion that individuals can have a lot of impact on the world when they really set their minds to it. I mean, I was in the board of directors of this company, and I just watched the CEO completely transform the company, and I could tell, like watching him make those decisions, that had he made different decisions. By the way, like about 30% of his decisions were wrong, but still not a bad, 70% is not a bad batting average. And it worked out that he created billions of dollars for this company. Um, but it was just, I came away from that like, a different person would have made different decisions and it would have had a totally different outcome. And, of course, he's a CEO, had more leverage than most people, but there's lots of room to change the course of history depending on how people act. And right now, we're all in a very high leverage point in history. And one of the reasons, I'm talking to you and writing books and doing other stuff is that I do want to see if I can change the conversation, get us to influence it to have a world where we have more widely shared prosperity. I think that's one possible path, but it's not the only inevitable path. There's some really bad paths as well.
Yeah, this really cuts at, you know, some really deep questions that I almost can't think of anyone else I could ask them to. Like, um, a- and I know that you don't just apply, classical or existing economic theories when you analyze things. Like, it's pretty clear to any listener at this point that you're just doing your best to think about everything. I hope that's clear. Um, and sometimes there's an existing framework that can help you analyze, and sometimes there's not, and you're clearly trying in all the cases that matter. So I want to know from you, like, in your opinion or experience, what are the types of questions that existing, um, I guess, consensus or shared economic frameworks for analyzing, the economy or business or industry. What are the types of questions that are amenable to consensus economic theories? And I don't even know about consensus, but like broadly understandable,
Yeah.
shareable, broadly, intelligible economic theories versus things that there's not really an economic theory for that, and there's no one applying it. Yeah, where's the
Well, so I recently wrote this paper called "A Research Agenda for the Economics of Transformative AI" with Ajay Agarwal and Anton Koronek, because in part motivated by a question like you just asked. I think we're at a period where our friends in AI research and technologists are just creating breathtaking capabilities that have the potential to completely transform almost every part of the world, including the economy. And as an economist, I figure, okay, I'm not going to necessarily figure out all the things that are happening in biology and physics or wherever else, but at least for economics, which is pretty important. And we came up with 9 big grand challenges. So let's see how well I can remember what they all were. So the first one is economic growth, and just like what's going to happen to productivity, the size of the pie, when's it going to take off, when's it not. The second one is innovation and experimentation, scientific discovery. Third one is inequality and labor demand. Another one is concentration of power and wealth, which is distinct from the inequality one, but like, really like concentration of business and economic concentration. Another one is existential risk, catastrophic risk, that we decided to include that. We debated whether to include that, but it is. You can have Chad Jones wrote this great paper, like if you had this one big dial that could increase growth, but also increase the odds that things went terribly wrong. Like, how far would you turn the dial, and when would you turn the dial up or down? Um, and you can think about it in different economic ways. Another question is measuring well-being, and like, what does it even mean? Suppose we have all our food, clothing, and basics taken care of, which I think is likely in some of these futures. Um, then, how do we measure, and what do we care about? Like, how do we measure well-being if it's not just some of the material things? And another one is transition economics. Just, that even if you can figure out all those questions, where the end point is, there's this whole transition that could be very bumpy. It could go smoothly. It could be difficult. I don't know if I got up to 9 there, but I think I may have.
I missed the very I made a list and I think maybe I forgot the very first one that you said.
Uh, uh, Economic growth,
Growth, right?
productivity, what happens to GDP. Um, so, um, so those are some of the big questions that we want economists to work on. We organized a conference of the National Bureau of Economic Research where we got all of our favorite top economists to come, and each worked on some of those questions. We're going to have a book coming out of where each of them sort of address them. But my meta goal is what your question is how do we get people to think about these challenges and rethink, economics in a world of transformative AI. And I should define transformative AI. It's AGI is more like a technical concept. Transformative AI is just whatever it is that creates a transition comparable to the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution. It's sort of this complete rethinking of the economy. That one took hundreds of years. This one, I think, is going to happen a lot faster.
Right. So there are all these vectors of change. Um, they're obviously difficult to anticipate, but some things are easy to anticipate. Like I can anticipate there will be a traffic jam on the Bay Bridge, you know, on January 8th, right? And that's a while from now, but I'm right. I
Yep.
can't anticipate. I'm no good at guessing who's going to be in the traffic jam, you know. Uh, and similarly with AI, I'm pretty good at like, okay, where self-driving cars I figured was going to be 2024. That was
Yeah.
right. You know, um, I think we're doing good enough on robots loading dishwashers, but we'll see. We'll see.
And
But
by the way, on the robots, like, at some level, this is like small potatoes, whether it's, 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And the self-driving cars, a century from now, people are going to be like, oh, that all happened in a blink of
yeah,
an eye. And like,
yeah,
we think 10 years is a long time. Yeah.
yeah. So there are these things, but if you ask me who's going to have the robots that wash the dishes, I just have no clue. Just like I
Yeah.
don't know who's going to be in the traffic jam. And why is it possible? Why is it easier to predict technology than to predict who's going to make it? I think it's because there are certain. It's not exactly as simple as the central limit theorem.
Right.
It's not like you just have enough coin flips and there's going to be an average. There's some kind of serial dependency of technologies that you can build on each other. But if you just think about what they are, you can anticipate like, okay, if you've got motion planning and fine motor controls and
Right.
and you've got image recognition and you got language, like that's going to be enough to talk to the machine to like move around to do the thing that it recognizes as
Right.
success and create a feedback loop for training more. It's like it just sort of you just have to sort of map out what are the steps that you need to build that, and then it starts to be more predictable. So my question for you is like why why are some things other than the central limit theorem and like
Mhm.
basic laws of supply and demand,
Mhm.
why are some things hard to predict and some things easier to
Mhm.
predict at at the scale of large groups like the economy?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think a lot of it is kind of like the central limit theorem or the, the law of large numbers that a lot of these random things tend to cancel each other out. And so, you know, whether it's one person or another, whatever, those sort of things at the very fine grain cancel each other out. But broadly speaking, there's an opportunity, and so GDP has and productivity have grown like, 1 or 2% per year quite consistently for, you know, almost 2 centuries. And it's just a lot of different things have happened in those periods. And sometimes it goes a little faster, sometimes a little slower. But I think all these factors kind of averaging out have been part of the story. So, yeah, I think, but that said, the reason we ask these 9 grand challenges, these big questions, is that we want to like sharpen that a little bit more and understand what the dependencies are, and we may be entering a inflection point where the transition is very different, and um, part of the reason that we're doing this is not so much whether they're predictable or not, but they're choosable or not. The NBER has a rule that you can't make policy recommendations. So for our book, we just had people describe what they saw as the levers and so forth without recommending one, although sometimes it's a little implicit.
Like if you pull this lever, you will live, and if you pull
Yeah,
this lever, you will die.
exactly, exactly.
No recommendation, just facts about what
I
will
know
happen.
the editors went through and they made sure we didn't say, had words like should or, but That said, we wrote a companion book, or uh, edited a companion book called The Digitalist Papers, Volume 2, about the economics of transformative AI, which explicitly does have recommendations. And that just came out. I should have brought a prop here so I could, let me just see if it's sitting around. I don't have a copy of it right here in my office. Um, but that just came out, and that one does have a set of recommendations. So we are, I mean, the reason that the question you're asking is important is not just out of curiosity, oh, that's interesting, about what's going to happen or what could happen, but also because I think we have a lot of leverage right now. And if we do see these, like you said, this road leads to ruin and this road leads to, nirvana, maybe we want to take some of the choices that make the second one more likely. And so we want to lay out what the trade-offs are and what the levers are.
So something that's always plagued me is, what decisions am I making
Uh-huh.
versus what decisions are like me and the 1,000 people most like me making versus what are me and the 1,000 people closest to me making, which is different. Proximity to me in social network
Right.
space is not the same as similarity to me in like personality and capability space.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a hard time figuring out, because that just seems figuring out who or what is making the decisions is really important for figuring out who or what to deliver the policy recommendations to. Um, and also who or what we want to make the decisions. Like there might be a meta decision about, will individualism and populism decide the
Yeah.
trajectory of AI, or will top-down government controls decide, or something in between, like, or will there be no humans? Will AI, discover how to control
Right.
its own future, and then humans aren't deciding it? Or is there no decider at all? There's just like chaotic biological soup on the earth covered by silicon.
Maybe that's the most important question at all. Which reminds me, that's one, when I listed the 9 things, I actually only listed 8 because I just remembered that the ninth one, which I should have remembered, is how does this all change the information environment, the flow of knowledge, the creation of knowledge, and the politics of all that? Because we've all seen, like with social media, how that can have an effect. And now we're entering a new uh, uh, information state where AI can create content, AI can create misinformation, humans and machines can create stuff, and understanding that information environment is incredibly important, and ultimately might in some ways help steer all the other ones, because depending on what kind of mechanism we use, like the meta question is how do we arrange who decides these questions? It could be, we could appoint a dictator or a king, and it could be a machine that decides it all, or we could have some kind of democracy, or we could have some kind of human machine leverage thing. Like one of the things we have in one of the books was what they're doing in Taiwan, where they have this uh, uh, system where it aggregates people's opinions and views and helps them see each other's views. So there are a number of
Polis.
options there, and depending, I think we've made some missteps with social media that allowed a lot of misinformation and confusion and hostility and polarization to spread. And you can tweak some of those dials and get very different outcomes. Um, and we should be conscious of that and try to, I think successful societies are the ones where they are more likely to amplify truth and cooperation and discovery, and less likely to amplify misinformation and polarization and hostility and, distraction. Um, it seems like a lot of social media is more optimized for the last 3 rather than the first 3, but I don't think it has to be that way. And as we design our information environment, there's lots of tools. I read this book by Steve Pinker called Rationality, and it's mostly about individual rationalities and all these tips and tricks about, like, learn Bayes' theorem and how you can be, more logical as an individual. But I think there's a similar set of principles how a society can be
Yes.
more logical. I don't think that book has really been written yet. Maybe one of our listeners will. I'll be happy to throw some ideas over the transom. But if we can create a society that amplifies, rationality, we're more likely to come to a good outcome.
Yeah, those principles you just named, honesty, discovery, cooperation or collaboration,
Yep.
um, those seem to me like fundamental principles of survival at the next scale of organization.
Yeah,
biologically speaking, right? Like my cells weren't collaborating, I would be dead. Um,
exactly. So I think that there is like some weak selection pressure for it, but who knows if we get to play out. We don't want to go
yeah.
through the having to die first
Well, you
to
can have selection pressure, but you can also have planning pressure for it,
better. Yeah, that's
right?
that's a lot more appealing. Yeah.
Like if you look at an embryo forming, like there are all these, these ion gradients that sort of plan out the morphology a little bit before the morphology takes shape. So there is some planning before doing, even in these very distributed. I mean, if you look, it's just a blob of cells, an embryo. It's just a blob. But somehow they managed to
They
agree on a
differentiate.
plan and different. Exactly.
Right. Well, evolution, there's lots of false paths that other organisms went down, and then this one survived. But we can do better, with human conscious planning, and that would be, yeah, that'd be a much better outcome. But I think, and by the way, we have evolved some. Like, I think, and these are all imperfect, but like the jury system, the scientific method, peer review, maybe blind peer review, adversarial courts. I don't know. You can mention a bunch of things that are sort of, citations that are sort of slightly designed to make it slightly more likely that truth and comes out. Um, every one of them I can point to flaws for sure, but I think that a lot of them have evolved to try to encourage, truth seeking.
I would also say there's truth seeking, but there's also collaboration. Like
Yes.
I think corporate bylaws are an amazing invention.
The corporation, a super intelligence, that like I say, back when I was on the board of that company, I told you how amazing the individual was who ran the company. But also, I got to say, it was amazing to just watch how all these mostly, no offense to them, average, mediocre people, all throughout this company were creating billions of dollars of value, and none of them individually knew how to create billions of dollars of value. But if they each did their little part, then collectively it was just incredibly valuable because
That's
they
my
all
hope for
cooperated.
me. That my hope for me is to somehow be part of something that's generating a lot of value. That um, yeah, that can benefit a lot of
Well,
people.
you are. I think there's two, I mean, at least a couple of ways. One is you can be part of a corporation that then it's very visible. But if you're part of a society, a market, like, the United States or even, the Earth today is this incredible economic system that creates a ton of value. I mean, I'm not a, anthropologist, but my understanding is like our brains are not like that different from people, 50,000 years ago, but
Yeah,
they didn't have anywhere near our wealth because they didn't, they weren't part of this system. But if you took one of them and, they were born and you plugged them into our current system, they would contribute lots of wealth. Or if you took one of us and put us back in those days, like Robinson Crusoe, sort of, we wouldn't create a whole lot of wealth.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's not our brains, which all not, or actually, maybe I should say not just our brains. It's the brains combined with our ability to have these cooperative structures.
Yeah, and the culture that we accumulate, our language, obviously. Fortunately, AI speaks our language now, so that's a very promising. I used to worry a lot more about AI, approaches to AI that didn't speak our language, that
Yes, that's
people wanted to.
amazing. And
Yeah,
we can watch them reason sort of, and like, as I'm not sure it's a perfect trace, but you get some sense of what's going on. But there's still, even like in the world today, you cross an international border and you may have a 10x decline or increase in the wealth creation of the average person.
right.
Again, I don't think mainly because, or at all because the people are necessarily smarter on one side or the other. They're just part of a different system. So you can create these institutions that really help with cooperation or that undermine it.
This brings me to, like, those principles you named of, like, discovery and truth seeking and cooperation. There's another one that comes to mind, which is adaptability,
Yes.
and it cuts against another principle of sort of integrity or some kind of, like, you know, how important is it for us to stay the same so that we don't lose who we are
There's
versus how
probably
important
some
is it?
optimal balance, right? Like you wouldn't want to be completely rigid or we'd all be like, mollusks or single-celled animals. It's like thankfully we evolved. But on the other hand, if you don't preserve some of what you had, then so believe it or not, I was having a conversation with ChatGPT yesterday about this topic and about what's the optimal lifespan of a individual in a species, the longer they live, that seems better, but then maybe you have less adaptability. But if you have a shorter lifespan, then, you have more room to change, and there's probably some optimum in there.
Well, there's
Um,
lifespan to reproductive age,
yeah.
and that's a little bit different than just how quickly it dies. Because if you have, obviously the genes get eliminated from the gene pool entirely if it dies, but you can get a
It's
lot
so
of
funny you say that.
recombination.
That was the first thing ChatGPT said back to me when I said what I just said to you. It was like, well, you got to make this distinction. So
Really? Oh,
Andrew
wow.
Critch and ChatGPT are on the same wavelength about correcting me.
I've also been using M dashes my whole life and just love M dashes.
All right. Now we know who the little homunculus inside of ChatGPT. You've just outed yourself.
Man, what a trip that would be. I mean, I've heard people say, these language models, they're not minds, they're mind simulators, and they just simulate, so we might all be in there, in some super compressed
Bits and
form.
pieces of us, yeah. But there's definitely a little bit of you for sure.
Well, and there's hallucinations of you apparently, about papers you didn't write.
No, I know exactly. It's in a way it's flattering, but it's also a little troubling. But yeah, no, when they did that thing about like how Anthropic had like stolen a bunch of my books or whatever, I was like, great, like I'm
That's
gonna
why I
actually.
wrote. That's why I wrote the books.
Yeah, I'm flattered. Like, here, take some more of my papers. I like my goal is that if everybody like gets to read my stuff, I'm happier. I don't like, So, but I guess other artists, it could be damaging their livelihood. But for me, I'm sort of like, I just post my stuff on the website and do podcasts, and I'm happy to have people hear my thoughts if
I
they
have no
care.
idea. I have no idea how hard to actually settle these class action type things. But I think if it was me and I had, intentionally or inadvertently used a bunch of people's work that the legal system decided I wasn't allowed to use, my immediate response would be, "Do you want some stock?"
Yeah.
Because I
No,
did that because I thought I was going to generate a ton of value. And
you know
I
what?
think you
I
should
should
get some.
ask. They offered me cash. I guess everybody gets offered cash, and it's
I
nice
would take
for every
stock.
ISBN. And I would rather have stock. Like I should write back to those guys and say, "Can you give me Anthropic stock? I think that's a better deal."
And what a win-win that would be, right? Like I think when
I
there's
like it.
this, there's like, I love the principle of, like forgiving your trespassers, right? But also teaming up with your trespassers. Like if your trespasser was there on your farm, maybe they were like getting some seeds. Like, what are they doing? Can we like team up somehow?
Sure. I mean, look, I just hurt my bargaining power by saying I'd be happy to give it to him for free, but but yeah, absolutely. If I could be part of like contributing to humanity's knowledge, I could compensate it for it. I'm very lucky at Stanford. They pay me. Don't tell my dean, but like I'd probably do it for free.
Wow.
It's such a fun job to have.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe, people talk about universal basic income. I think universal, I mean, I keep coming to biology for how we're going to survive and adapt, because it's like biology is the study of the most survivable, adaptable things, that we know of, which are life forms, right? So I keep thinking, plant cells have these rigid walls, animal cells have these like softer membranes, and so
Hmm.
they can adapt faster and to their environment. And animals seem to be more in control of the earth now, especially if you count humans, than what plants are in
Yeah,
control.
although I don't know. What if you did the total biomass? As I look out my window, there's a lot more plant biomass than animal biomass.
But
Maybe that's the game they're
yeah,
playing.
but I think, in this weird "what if we decided" sense, I think if humans decided to destroy the world, we could get it done. And I think if plants couldn't do that somehow, oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, yeah. Then there's the next generation. Machines have all sorts of things we can like. I think one of the coolest things machines can do that we can't do is they can communicate their knowledge like more or less instantly, and just like like cloud robotics. Boom, they all
Yeah.
know what
If
each
they've been
other's know.
trained, if they've been trained in the same, with the
Yeah,
same like embedding space for their
yeah.
their vector embeddings. Yeah. Which is interesting because I think if you apply pressure to language models to be able to communicate with other language models that were not trained in the same training run, it creates this interesting legibility constraint where they might. I hope we can end up with some division of powers where there's not just one supermind AI that controls everything, but there's enough of them that we can ask them for second opinions, or we can ask them to debate something in terms that would be at least legible to another AI that could arbitrate the debate, right? Um, and then you don't get this this like super concentrated central overlord mind effect.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm super worried about that. I do see it's pretty easy for me to tell a story where you do get a lot of concentration, and I hope there are going to be some countervailing forces. Zoe Hitzig and I just have a paper in this NBR volume I mentioned about um, how AI could lead to a lot of centralization. You know, there's this famous paper by Friedrich Hayek called The Use of Knowledge in Society that argued that all the useful knowledge was widely dispersed and distributed, and it was just impossible for it all to be assembled into one mind. And that was true in 1945 when he wrote the paper, but it seems less true today. And so we play out that scenario. What if you could assemble most of the relevant knowledge in one location? And it leads to obviously some unpleasant. It could be super efficient. That's the
well,
good
the
news.
first
But
thing you can do with that is then you can copy it.
yeah,
And then now you've got multiple of them generating new knowledge that, again, struggles to be recompressed into one location. So I think there will always, as long as reproduction is a dynamic in the system, there is always going to be this.
I hope
It might
so.
not leave humans in the equation, but I think there will be some decentralized aspect of how like intelligence in the universe operates.
Well, it depends on whether there's any like economic advantage to the copy. I mean, versus the original. Maybe,
Well,
maybe
this
not.
is why I go to ecology rather than economics, right? It's like things that copy themselves become more prevalent, things that don't copy themselves don't. So it's like, how am I supposed to not expect things to copy themselves if the most prevalent things are the ones that copy?
Well, I mean, maybe it's a semantic thing, but like if there's an entity that has copies of itself everywhere and they're all kind of connected in a single hive, is that one entity or multiple entities? I don't know.
I was actually, I'm actually thinking about light speed limitations eventually,
Yeah,
where,
actually, yeah, we talk about that in the paper. Eventually, there is, obviously, if you're going to Mars, that is very relevant. But even if you're having like drone warfare, you need to have the local entity be able to react in whatever
yeah,
nano.
like the Earth itself, because, it only takes a second for light to get around, could become more like one organism if it's sufficiently interconnected. But then beyond that,
Yeah, yeah. There are a few, like the drones is one. Another one we've mentioned in the paper is, there are these Wall Street traders that are, milliseconds apart from Chicago, with the
right.
Chicago Board of Options trade, and some people make money on that difference there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a whole digression. I used to work in finance, and I find it's a really beautiful dance that's being done there. But I don't want I don't want to digress.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd use the word beautiful, but it is
I actually
a
I
dance.
think it is, but I have a different thing I want to ask you about, and it comes back to this. Um, it comes back to this organism versus species thing because
Yeah,
um, the more interconnected we are, the more I think we're like an organism, and even if you don't buy it, I still want to ask like an SAT analogy style question, which is, are humans, in the resulting economy that we're going to get, or ecology that we're going to get once we have, let's say, robots, and maybe that is 20 years away. Um, Nonetheless, do you think, are we going to be more like neurons? Are we going to be more like skin cells? Are we going to be more like, because there's all these different, you know, ways that um, entities of varying degrees of intelligence or processing speed can coexist. Like our somatic cells in our body are way slower than neurons at firing, but they still fire. They still change these gradients that help them plan and make decisions about whether to be cancer or not, and so on. And they manage to coexist with the brain, which is much faster, but the brain is still more in charge. As soon as neurons evolved, the much faster neuron things took over the control of the slower somatic cell types. And uh, and I keep wondering, like, what can we learn from that? If silicon's so much faster than us,
right.
so much faster than me or you,
Yeah,
um, how can we coexist with it? And should we try to be like the cells of the eye, for example, like the lens? They last almost your whole life. They're like,
mhm,
the average lifespan is like 75 years, which is the same as a neuron. And they're not smart the way neurons are smart. Like, they're not part of this like collective, it's deciding stuff, but they're still there.
mhm.
And I'm just trying to think, like, where would you if you were to pick a cell type that you've heard of, or that you can just, maybe you don't even know the name of it, but some body part, like what do you think the humans are going to be as a body part on the Earth?
Well, that's pretty interesting. So now I get what you're saying about the organism. So I do think, and we were talking earlier about how us as a civilization can create so much more wealth than we could as individuals. So in that sense, we are more like an organism that like works together. I get that. And then with machines and computers, it's going to potentially almost surely be much more integrated into like this global thing. Maybe the Martians could like be separate, but probably they'll all be, it's like, given that the speed of light's pretty fast, like they're all going to be pretty connected. So one big entity, what kind of cell would we be? I don't know if there is such a cell, but like I sadly, I think the most likely, if you turn the dial all the way to that future, like this thought experiment, like I don't think there's a whole lot that humans can add to the equation other than like maybe the pleasure cell or the meaning cell. Like maybe if we do that right, we are the value and what they're trying to optimize. Is there a cell in the body that's like that? That basically all the other cells, if we do it right, are trying to make this one cell happy. um,
There are cells like that,
are there?
gametes. I mean,
Yeah, gametes might be the closest. Yeah, so they try to like ensure the survival and whatever of that cell. Maybe not necessarily for reproduction, but just but because you know I've had these conversations with Richard Sutton, and his view is sort of the mind children view of that we're going to pass the baton to these entities that are so much more powerful than us that there's not much that we can do to, add value. But if we do it right, they'll care about us. And like hopefully our grandchildren will care about us, and they'll want to make us happy, and they'll want to do right by us. I don't know if that's going to happen. I hope it
There's a
does.
question of whether to, I certainly think conditional on these super powerful beings existing, we should aim for them caring about us. And then there's a question of whether to aim for having them around at all. And certainly some people
With
think we
risky,
just,
right?
yeah,
Because at that
yeah,
point you've kind of given up control. Um, and so if for some reason
sort
they
of.
decide to stop caring about us, we're kind of at their mercy.
I mean, you've given up a certain kind of control. Like many people, like many gametes still manage to you know, meet their pair. Like many, obviously birth rates are declining, so it's not happening as much as before we invented contraceptives and all the cultures, whatever the effects are that are making birth rates go down. But gametes are still, they still have a big say in what's happening. And there's this question of, I think there's a decision that we get to make, which is, and again, it comes back to this question of adaptability versus adaptation versus persistence. Like, if I allow myself to mutate arbitrarily, then the thing
Right.
that I just reproduced into is barely recognizable as my descendant. And so
That's a good point too.
did I,
Yeah. I mean, if
like, for
we,
example, if I just point to a giraffe that was born in in a zoo, could I say, no, that's my baby giraffe? You can't tell, but actually that's my baby giraffe. It looks like it was birthed by those two giraffe parents over there, but actually psychically, I manifested it. You're just gonna be like, no, that's not your baby, right? And in the same way, if I actually magically manifested a giraffe, you'd still say, well, you didn't really. That's not, you magically
right.
manifested a giraffe. That's not your baby, right?
No, and yeah,
Um,
we will be able to do genetic engineering, ad infinitum, and for that matter, combine it with physical systems. And, there's whatever Theseus's ship where you just keep modifying things. At some point, it's unrecognizable what the connection is to the original. Um,
but it
yeah,
seems
that
like there must
seems
be some scale crossing principle of like, you know, if something adapts too fast, then it can't, if something mutates too fast, it can't keep around the beneficial adaptations that it had for persistence. And then if something mutates too slowly, then it can't
that,
adapt. So
well, that's true. But there's a separate question about like, is it still somehow part of the original?
is it still
And
itself, right?
and that might just be an illusion, come to think of it either way. I mean, it may just be, I don't know. Well, what's your answer? Do you have a cell that you think that we will be like, or we should try to be like?
Man, yeah, I actually feel like we should try to be like a bunch of different cell types based on our personalities. Like, I think
Ah.
some people are very nostalgic and they want to keep their tradition and their way of life. And someone like that maybe should be like a retina cell, like or not a retinal cell, like a lens cell in
Right,
the
because
eye
it
that
just
just
stays. Yeah.
it stays the same, but it's like very valuable and it's respected by the whole body as like having an important role. And if you lose it, you're going to feel a lot of pain and sadness about it, right? And then other people, you know, um, yeah, I think some people might really want to be part of the information hub and then be like a neuron that's in the brain, and you're not in charge, but you're part of the thing that
You're
is.
contributing. You're doing your part. Like that's what a lot of us are these days. I
Yeah.
sometimes feel like on social media, I'm like a little neuron that like absorbs certain kinds of information and sends other information, and in between, I maybe do a little bit of processing. This is worth passing on. This other stuff is not worth passing on.
And then you have
Um,
the glial cells, which are, I think, more like a role that humans could play because glial cells are slow, much slower in their firing rates than neurons, but they're
mhm.
hanging out right next to the neurons, holding them together.
Yeah, and the
Um,
neurons are doing all this fast stuff, but
right.
but I still wonder if there's going to be any practical utility,
For
because
the humans.
almost
Yeah.
every one of those functions that you described, depending on how far you turn the dial, and now we're flipping roles, but like now I'm imagining like turning the dial all the way.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to believe that this particular collection of atoms inside my head is going to be superior to forever to some other collection of atoms that's
This is why I
optimized?
keep coming to this notion of superiority that's based on counterfactuals. It's like they're superior in terms of its tendency to destroy other things, and then there's superiority in terms of its ability to help other things. And those are both determinants of whether it survives. Like if you're very destructive, you'll be eliminated by immune functions by the higher level systems, or by just territorial defense of things that are trying to kill you before you destroy them. But if you're very helpful, you can merge like humans have into larger systems that compete at that scale and interact. Businesses do trade with each other instead of just humans now.
Right, but
Um,
but to be helpful, you have to be able to do something that couldn't be done some other way.
yeah, but then there's the question of like who or what are you being helpful to? And if the things that you're being helpful to, it's a circular. Eventually, it becomes a circular, not just a circular argument, but a circular value proposition, which is that if humans value humans
Yeah. Actually,
ontologically,
I buy it. That's a good answer. And I think it's very plausible that humans will value other humans just for being human. My son likes to play chess a lot. I asked him, he prefers to play chess against other humans versus against machines, you know, for whatever reason. A lot of us have, artisanal rugs or whatever that were done by a human. They may not objectively be better or even as good as something that's machine made, but we just like it. And it's just, and I like talking to real people, I don't know. So yeah, I think there is something to that kind of artisanal human connection that may persist maybe forever.
like we think about doing versus being in
Yeah.
different cultures, and I think the idea that humans are valued for what they do might have to go away and be replaced by, and if we survive at all, we're valued for what we are being.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely. Humans as ends, not means, makes a lot of sense to me.
and then there's
Because
a
yeah,
question
yeah,
of
and
whether,
that's a much more defensible. We better like sort of socialize that value system because if we put it all on only what we can do, eventually we're going to lose.
yeah, and I also keep thinking about property rights. Like, look, I have this house that I live in, and this stuff in the house. You're a really smart guy. I bet you could do better stuff with my stuff than I'm doing. You know, or maybe but somebody out there can. Maybe you don't want to accept that it's you. Somebody out there, I think, could just take all the
Probably not
stuff in
me.
my house. Somebody out there could just take all my stuff and just do something quote unquote better with it for the economy. But we still have this private property right where that would cause chaos. We don't want that to be how the world works.
Right.
Um, so we don't allow it. And you see that in organisms. Like, not every cell in my body is equally good at doing its job as a muscle cell or a skin cell. But if we were constantly just destroying them, and taking them apart for their constituent components, that would be dysfunctional. So there's some organizing principle of private property that is necessary for biology and that is present in the economy as it exists. And my
Mhm.
question is, can we, in the embryology of the Earth, not just the evolution of species as competing entities within the Earth, but to the extent that the Earth is becoming more organism-like, more interconnected, and can have a vague plan for itself as it forms, the way an embryo has a vague plan for itself as it forms. Can the Earth, with the humans in it, choose um, to you know to persist um, these principles of ownership over what we get to do with our stuff, or with our homes, or
Yeah.
with our bodies. And if we can persist some of those principles, they could be self-fulfilling. Like private property as a principle, the idea that everyone gets a home, everyone gets clothes. That principle could be, well, why? Well, we value that. That's the thing that we want to copy. That's the thing that wants to reproduce, is that concept. I don't know how we could um, aim for that other than by talking about it, or caring about private property rights, or caring about people. Um,
Yeah. In this Digitalist paper, volume 2, there are a couple of essays that talk about not just universal basic income, but universal basic capital, and sort of like something that we own a stake in the future that kind of protect us. And y- you know, a lot of details need to be worked out, like not least of which funding it all, but also just, how do you protect people from hanging on to it? Like the universal basic capital idea is that you don't like, you can't just lose it or give it away. Singapore and some other countries, have efforts to do parts of this where you kind of have a stake in society and stuff that is just yours.
yeah. So, I think a lot of my listeners, at least, and probably yours too, know that these are important questions and decisions that we need to make together. And I feel that the more people we're doing, like similar to what you're doing, of actually trying to take stock of where we are, warn people about the changes and the opportunities that are around to adapt, and um, steer ourselves, steer our communities and our countries in these positive directions. Uh, I think the more people would do that, I think the embryology of the Earth would be more coherent, and we'd become more organism-like. So I want to ask you now,
Mhm.
what advice do you have to help more people do what you do? Obviously,
Yeah.
you give that advice to your students all the time, but to someone who's not at Stanford right now, how can they?
Well, I mean, you know, my own choice, not necessarily a choice for everybody else, but what I think there's just been amazing progress on the capabilities, and there's just not nearly enough thinking about what we do about that and how that changes the world. So that to me is the bottleneck that we, like you just said, we need a lot more attention to that. And it could be through economics, it could be through other disciplines and method, sociology, philosophy. I think is going to be actually more and more important because, like, what is it that we value? Um, that's a really important question. I don't think philosophers have given me, I haven't heard like what a really good answer to that question is. Like, what should we be valuing? And it's kind of like, the final exam is coming and, the teacher's about to say pencils down. Like, okay, what is it you want? Because we'll be able to have these incredible machines that will create things that we want. And if we can't even say what it is, that's not good. So that's really where we should be focusing our energy, is figuring out what we want to point all these things at. Part of it is those 9 challenges I mentioned in economics before. And I think there's just a ton of wide open territory to be addressed there on every one of those questions, and others as well, to make progress. I think just a lot more people need to take the potential and the likelihood of transformative AI seriously and think, okay, what does that mean that we should be doing as a society? Um, and there's so many open questions that I don't think I have to like to prescribe one or the other is like the main one they need to work on. Any one of those 9 or others that probably, that I'm sure I haven't thought of are worth addressing, because we it's kind of weird. It's almost little implausible that you and I and all of us listening are born at this time in history where we just have so much leverage over the future. I think, all the previous generations didn't have nearly this impact. And future generations, I don't know what's going to happen to them, but a lot of it's going to depend on our choices, like during this particular time in history. My wife thinks that maybe this is some kind of a evidence that we're in a simulation because, like, what are the odds that we get to be alive at this particularly amazing time in history? But we do, and so I just think we need to take it really seriously. And in particular, this point about agency, I'm really convinced that there's no like one inevitable outcome, and that if we replayed it with different choices, we would get different outcomes. It's more like the butterfly effect, where even like relatively small changes may have very big um, impacts going forward. So, pretty exciting for me, and I think all your listeners, hopefully as well, to be able to work on some of these problems and maybe make a difference.
So I mean, so that's a great caring step. Is like, hey, take this seriously. We're here in this moment. Logistically, let's say I'm a professor at let's say especially somewhere not in California, actually, because in California it's so much easier to make contact with the tech industry here. What if I'm a professor in Washington or
Well, number
Oregon or New
one,
York, whatever? Yeah.
move to California. That's what I did. No, I'm half joking, but like, let me just pursue that for a little bit. Look, I was at MIT. I had like Cambridge is filled with lots of smart, interesting people. I love it. I had such a good time there, but it really is here in the Bay Area is the epicenter of where this stuff is happening. I run into people like you, and every time I go to a barbecue or a cocktail party, I run into somebody who's just doing like breathtaking, cool stuff. And maybe or maybe not, I would have heard about it if I was still in Cambridge, but I just feel like the pace of change and people think so big here. There really is, there's a cultural difference. I didn't fully appreciate it until I came here that a lot of the people here just really want to change the world. And I thought maybe they're just kind of bullshitting, but I think they're mostly pretty sincere and they have these very grand hopes to change. That's part of what attracted them here is to try to do that. And not all of them are going to succeed, but they give it a shot, which is kind of fun to be around. So there is a lot of truth to just being part of this ecosystem and having the speed of light or whatever else be a little shorter in terms of interacting. That said, there's also an invisible college of people that can all interact. Um, I encourage people, selfishly to be part of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab ecosystem if they want to. We have a bi-weekly seminar that we do most Mondays, like not right now because of break. And they can listen on that. They can ask questions. If they're, a postdoc or a PhD student, assistant professor, senior professor, and they want to come visit, write to me and, we'll see if we can work something out and you want to work on some of these problems. If you're a donor, feel free, to help support all those people I just described. But I want to create a stronger and stronger ecosystem. I mentioned earlier the AI economic dashboard so we can see empirically what's happening. There's also a bunch of theorists that are trying to understand better what's happening, combine the empirical and the theoretical stuff together. And then we're adding more policy making. I've sort of shied away from policy making because I felt like I wanted to first figure out what was happening before I started spouting off with a bunch of recommendations. But more and more senators and people from the administration are approaching me. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to try to give some advice, even if it's not all perfect and worked out. So those are some practical things, specifically part of our ecosystem. And we do events and activities that are we're doing one on economic measurement we're doing another one on economics of transformative AI. So, we continue to do these things that people can be part of as well. Those are some things concretely. There's more and more, if you're an economist, there's more and more economists who are beginning to take the economics of transformative AI seriously. The National Bureau of Economic Research is kind of one of the big organizations that cuts across all universities that people are part of. I've been part of the AI and digitization working group there for a long time. I kind of founded the IT and digitization group. And now the president of the NBR has sort of blessed us to focus on transformative AI. And I think that's a big step because the economics profession is kind of conservative, and most economists kind of, were thought that AI was a little overhyped and have been kind of downplaying it. But now more and more of them are taking it seriously, the way you and I have during this conversation. And I think we're still, a little bit of an outlier compared to the average economist, but there's more and more, especially young economists, who are focusing on this. And that, the more who join, the better, because there's just a lot of work to be done, and way more than I can do for sure.
I really appreciated the move to California point because you know, I moved here from like a fishing village in Canada where,
Mhm.
you know, very different lifestyle. And I moved a couple times on the way here, and there's a lot about my home and where I'm from that's really important to me and makes me want to be there. But also, if I'm not here, I don't have as much of a say over how all this is going to change. And I
Right.
feel like if people really care, um, there's this question of do you stay where you are because that's who you are, or do you adapt and go to where you can somehow stand up for who you are and what you want the world to value, what you want the economy to be like. And I feel like I would like to see more, almost like a pilgrimage of academics to the Bay Area to just show up and
Yeah.
find out really what's going on here.
At least, especially the ones who are like interested in these topics, ambitious. One of the things that made America great was, I think, they disproportionately attracted the most adventurous people from all the other countries. And so there was sort of a selection effect there, that the average person, stayed home in Europe or Asia or wherever. And some of the more adventurous people, like my parents, came to America. And so you get this group of people who are sort of ambitious. And I think within America, like California and the Bay Area play a bit of that role, that you get people, well, actually, not just from America. You get people from India and China and France and Vietnam and Africa that are doing, that are excited about doing this. And so I think that's why you get this disproportionate impact. So many trillion-dollar companies and billion-dollar unicorns, because many of the people who created them were actually born somewhere else, but they came here. I hope America keeps attracting those best people, not just selfishly for the sake of the Bay Area and America. I think it's great for America. It's also, I think, good for the world for them to be together, because they create more value when they're together, or maybe I should say we create more value when we're together. There's this theory in economics called the O-ring theory that basically, Michael Kramer got a Nobel Prize for it, that basically says that, like, smart, exceptional people create more value when they're with other smart, exceptional people. And, I think there's a giant misconception that having smart engineers from India or China makes American engineers less valuable, like supply and demand. It's just the opposite. Those American engineers, part of the reason they can create amazing things is they're working side by side with other amazing people. And if they were all by themselves, with none of those amazing people around them, it would be hard to create that much value. So, we should welcome more brilliant, ambitious, creative people, because it's like a positive sum effect.
Well, let's thank you for the welcoming the welcoming there. I feel welcome in the state of California.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
you're one of those people that I'm so lucky that I got to know you here. And it's exactly the reason I like being in California.
well, Erik, one more question before we go. What's something you wish somebody asked you in an interview that no one's ever asked before, but you just wish somebody would ask me about that thing? And I'll even pause for you to think about this because you might have to search. You've done a lot of interviews, and you might have to search your memory.
I don't have a good answer to that. I'm sort of embarrassed.
Oh my
I don't have a
goodness.
good answer to.
You've just been asked so many questions in your life already. It's just like they've been
I'm
answered.
just not that creative. I just like, I remember there's one paper, I won't say, there was this co-author who just was not that good, a thinker, but he had this talent for asking these like really dumb, obvious questions. And I was like, "Oh," well, and then I would like explain it, and the answer would be like really good, to be self-congratulatory, but it would never have happened if the person hadn't asked this like naive question. Like sometimes those the asking the right question is where so much of the value comes from.
That's who I want to be in life because isn't that what Sam Altman says? Be the sort of person who asks good questions to a superintelligence.
I think so. Well, I don't want to be the super intelligence, but I do think asking good questions is increasingly going to be the most valuable thing going forward because the AIs will be able to answer more questions. And there are some people that I just feel smarter around because they just kind of bring out the best in me. And you're one of those people, and I think that is a increasingly valuable skill is to be able to ask the good questions. So I'm going to leave it to you to
All right,
ask
all
the
right,
question because I've just discovered by you asked me that question that I'm not nearly as good at asking questions,
okay.
and that's a real important
Well, we're a
talent.
good team because Ben, I have a lot of questions. Thank you so much
I think
for
that's the
answering them.
answer. I think that's
Yeah.
the answer. Yeah, great.
Great. Well, thank you, Erik. This has been really great. I always love talking to you, and I'm really privileged for the opportunity to share that experience now with other
Oh, the
people through
privilege is
this. So,
mine because, like I just said, I would not have had nearly as much fun thinking about these topics if it wasn't for spending the past hour or two with you.
wow. All right. Well, let's call it. Thank you,
All
Erik.
right.
And everybody, if you haven't read Erik's paper, I'm going to get the title right. The Canaries in the Coal Mine: 6 Facts About Recent Unemployment Effects of Artificial Intelligence. I
Employment effects, not unemployment effects. That's a little Freudian slip there.
did I say that? Okay, okay. Do read it because we all need to keep track of this stuff in order to adapt as people and as society. And they really got some amazing data there to analyze. So thank you, Erik, for doing that.
Thank you, Andrew. Always a pleasure.
All right. Bye bye.